Welcome to Class Act Coaching, a podcast for teachers and instructional coaches. This show is brought to you by the Southern Regional Education Board. At SREB, we believe every one of you deserves a coach. Whether you're inspiring students or guiding teachers, let our school improvement team be your coach this week. Hello, everybody. I'm Ashley. Welcome back. And with me once more is Jason. Hi, Jason. How are you?
Hi, Ashley. I'm doing great. How about yourself?
I am wonderful. I am excited about today's episode because I feel like I have something really cool that I want to talk about with one of our coaches today.
Awesome. Well, what do you have?
Okay, so I am really big into project-based learning. I'm big into trying to make connections to the workplace, and we've talked about that in general a few times, but I really want to find a coach that can help me either create a project in my classroom or maybe in my case, because I do have a few I'm already working on, help me improve a project that I'm already doing in my class. Do you have anybody that can help me build a project?
We brought Marty Sugerik in once before to talk about starting a project, so I really think we could bring him back if that'd be okay with you.
Yeah, that's actually great because his lesson on work-based learning that he did the last time was one of the ideas that got me to this, that I was like, oh, I should have somebody help me with one of my projects. So I think he'd be perfect to be really our kind of first repeating guest, other than, of course, Dan has come a couple of times. So
Sure.
That's perfect.
Yeah, I think Marty's the perfect person to continue that exploration of careers and into project-based learning.
All right. Well, I am looking forward to talking to him again, and I will talk to you after we're done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Marty. How are you?
I'm good, Ashley. How are you?
I am great. You are our first repeat guest other than Dan. And so thank you for being willing to come back and talk to us.
I appreciate that. I'm trying to grow myself a little bit and do more things like this.
All right. Well, so in our last episode with you, you introduced yourself a little bit. So anybody that wants to know more about you, I'll listen to that episode. But you talked about how you work with project-based learning and workplace education. However you would word that. And so I thought maybe today you might want to introduce what you do at SREB and how it relates to kind of bringing the workplace into the classroom. So would you like to talk a little bit about that first?
Sure. And a lot of it has to do with my background. So I'm not originally an educator by choice. I went into the nuclear Navy. I was in engineering and radiation health physicist. And then I was asked or ordered by my captain to go to training division. And that's where I got my taste for instruction. So I'm coming from industry training kind of mindset. I got out of the Navy, went back, got an education degree and master's, and taught high school and post-secondary math. My role at SREB it's a wonderful position because I work with all teachers, K through 12, career tech, doesn't matter, and support staff as an instructional coach. But having had 8 years in industry and then another 20 as a teacher, I can speak and kind of empathize with the new landscape of people we have in the classroom today, which everybody knows we've got a lot of new people to education coming from all different types of backgrounds. I just came off a week trip of 3 different sites, Pennsylvania and New York, where I've been doing instructional coaching specifically around project-based learning. And projects today, in the education standpoint, are now being validated as evidences that students or adults could use on a resume. So it's not just your work experience working for an employer, but it's also, do you have evidence of projects that you've worked on? And this is huge because Perkins, that works with career technical education and is a funding stream for that, they validated that through their definition. They changed work-based learning to include on-site simulations. REB's project-based learning model fits very nicely as a model for teachers to develop more authentic projects that simulate the workplace and those skills, and then those can be counted as work-based learning hours for students. And this is where I'm getting leverage. We allow the teacher to validate what they're already doing. So when we share these practices, we're not going to jump right into training and start building. We're going to stop for a second and actually validate. What do they already do? What do they already know because when we find that you show that respect, that professionalism of, listen, I'm not going to assume you don't know how to do this. Let's go through. I've been using the PBL practices for teachers to be able to reflect on their work, not just if they're coming from teaching, but some of these people that we're working with have been project managers in industry. So they understand projects from an industry standpoint. So our conversation there becomes more of just, so what is the educational language? How do we see projects from an educator lens? So it's been very positive. I just ran this in 2 sites last week. This is how I'm running my coaching. And I had K through 12 teachers at one site, all CTE teachers at another site. And what I do is I walk them through. Okay, so in industry, we use piloting, right? Simulating small scale trial production. You use industry language to talk about piloting something. You're going to try some new technology at work. We then make that connection to teaching, right? And say, okay, if we're going to implement a new project, right? We want to use the SREB design process because it's iterative, just like industry. You're going to ask, inquire, you're going to imagine solutions, you're going to plan, you're going to create. Then you experiment, evaluate. That's when you actually implement. But then that piece at the end is where teachers now are challenged, or the people we're working with, I should say, to reflect on that experience and make the adjustments for the next iteration of the project. So it's that growth mindset that we use at SREB. And so it's been very positive because teachers have some of this mindset already in. It just is an industry language. But once they see our practices, this is where I'm getting a lot of drive, because the SREB design PBL practices, and for that, any of our practices, are broken up into what is the student's role and responsibility during this piece, during this experience on the project? What is the teacher's responsibility and duties, right? And then what evidence would you produce? That translates so well to industry, because if I'm a supervisor, right, I'm the leadership role. What are my duties and responsibilities? You're the employee. You have duties, responsibilities. And what do we have to do? We have to have evidence to validate what we're doing. So it's been very positive. So that's been the model for coaching for me when I'm working with PBL, specifically newer teachers or teachers who may not have come out of a traditional education setting.
This is really fascinating to me because a little bit of background about me. I also worked in the legal field for many years and then moved into marketing. Strange path, but to go from the law to marketing, but I did it. And then one of the reasons I started teaching, which my teaching experience is not the same as everybody listening. It's during the day, I still do my marketing and I do communications here at SREB. But the reason I got into education, both as a teacher and then as somebody who works for an education nonprofit, is because I was seeing people coming out of school and coming and working with me, and they might have been great students and they just couldn't, the workplace was so different to them. So a big part of why I wanted to start teaching at all was because I was like, how do I help these people when they come into a job, actually, in my case, be able to write work-based writing things, but I can see that from any angle. So what you're talking about is really close to my heart. So I'm very excited to talk to you about it today.
Great. Yeah. And I mean, what we're stimulating is what, and I love using industry and business language, because again, that's another leverage point with not only teachers, but with students, even parents or community, right? And so we can talk about onboarding and workflow. We're using industry language, and I think it's bridging over to what we would say educational research and pedagogy and that vocabulary. And I think what we're doing is we're having an opportunity to grow teachers faster, simply if you validate and make those connections. Like your experience in the field, if I were coaching with you, would be just along those lines. Please tell me, how did you manage people? Did you ever roll out a project? Tell me that story. And it's more active listening on the coach to listen to your story, what you did, skills, how you worked with people, because a lot of times I don't know your industry. I've never been in marketing or law or any of those fields. So to hear your story, and then as the coach, it's my job to make those connections from your experience to the practices that we use, research-based strategies and methods that we use in our practices at SREB. So that's been the leverage, is just that vocabulary and understanding who you are, what your work experiences are. So a lot more listening, not now than ever, in coaching.
Well, so I thought maybe today we could actually kind of do that. You can coach me through something. Show me your process. I want to do a better workplace project in my classroom. And so maybe you can kind of walk me through it, and we can talk about some ways that other subject people like math and history would do the similar things.
Sure.
So that's not just English based, but that's what we could do today.
Sure. So, the first question I'm going to ask you, and then you go to SREB's design process, and the first step is ask and inquire. Well, I'm using that same project design process for coaching. So I'm going to ask you, are you redesigning a project that you already do, or are you designing from scratch? Because if we're designing from scratch, then we can take a different approach and go through the basic elements of a really good high quality project-based learning and do some more of that pedagogy. But if you're redesigning an existing project, then I'm going to ask and inquire. Tell me about the project that you already do.
Okay. I'm going to ask you a question. What do you see the most of that? Because I have a lot of projects that I could rework that I would love to go through. But if the majority of the people you're seeing and helping are starting from scratch, then I'll start from scratch too.
Well, and that's just it. As a coach, you never know. So I've worked with people from industry who have managed projects for many years in their career, and they have a project in their mind, maybe from auto tech, and they go, this is kind of what I want to do. I did this in industry. So they're not really truly building from scratch. If we were going from scratch, it would be, let's take a look at your content and what you teach and the standards. And then we would do some more brainstorming around ideas of what are some authentic scenarios or simulations that you've experienced. And then we do some standard alignment. So that's a lot of the pre-work that has to be done if you're starting from scratch. So let's start with something, and look, as low-hanging fruit, many teachers want to get started. So let's take something you're already doing.
Right. That's what I was thinking for time anyway. That's good. Let's do something that I already have. So I have a project in mind for us to go through, and you could help me improve it.
So I'll start with what we talk about, which is backwards design. So at the end of the project, what am I hearing? If I were in the audience, what would I hear your students saying and doing and talking about?
The one I want to talk about is a secondary or primary research project. So the end goal is they have to write an essay that is based in primary research, not secondary research. So they have to investigate something or observe something. That's the goal. In my case, I have them, for each of the papers, I pick a different career to kind of use to show how that style of writing might be used. And in that particular paper, for the primary research, I use detectives. So the final product is an investigative report.
Love it. I love both two things that you mentioned. One, you're using an authentic occupation. As I coach with you, right, I'm going to provide a lot of ideas. We'll circle back and go through all these, but it's just to get your mind going about where you could sustain inquiry, which is one of the practices in our SREB's PBL, right? Is how do we sustain inquiry with our students? You could have them investigate, what are those occupations? How much do they make? What type of skills do they have? Because there's a connection. One of the things I would ask you in this project is, what types of skills are they using during the project? And not just skills, right? Technical skills, maybe. So are they using technology and computers to research, document evidence? Are they using other detective tools, so to say? Academic standards and skills, right? Obviously, they're doing research, and there's a process for that. And then spelling, grammar, punctuation, and all those things of how to write. And that's the second part I was going to really compliment you on, was you're having them write an authentic document.
Right.
And so, you are a detective and you are faced with the challenge of writing a report. Now, do they get to choose their own topics?
I do give them, because we do something in class and not everybody can make it to the class where we do this, and then they wouldn't be able to write the paper. So I give them an alternative of something they can do on their own. But what we do for the project, for the people that participate in this part of it, is there's murder mystery games that you can play with like your friend. We do one in class. So I'll have a couple of classes where it's like, you can pick one or you can come to both of them. It's the same game. And they're the detective at a murder mystery game. And so that's where the research is, right? They have to know how to ask, and they have to plan ahead of time investigative questions as the detective of what they're going to, they need to know what they're going to ask all the suspects at the game in order to kind of figure out who did it. And they have to, then there is, because the game does provide this, there's some forensic evidence. There's a map of the location. So you have to be able to say, oh, person A was here, but the murder happened here. There's no way they could make it in time. So they couldn't be the murderer. So you do have a map. You have forensic evidence that has things like where fingerprints were found, things like that. So that's all the research that they have. There's not a lot of external research on this one, but they get all that. If they go to the game and they're not prepared with good questions, they might not get good responses from the suspects, in which case they might not have enough evidence when they go to write the paper to figure out the murder. So they have to be able to that's something that they do have to externally research, that they might need to investigate. What kind of questions does a detective ask? How do those questions lead to finding the suspect? Things like that they need to know how to do.
So again, in my coaching, language matters. And so I always like to validate when I listen to what you're sharing with me. I always like to validate. And so I like that. What you are doing and what I'm hearing you telling me about is that you've created kind of a launch to the project, a simulation, if you will, to get their heads wrapped around the project itself. And I love that. And that's actually part of a high quality project, right? In industry, they'll call it a kickoff meeting, right? Where all the employees get together and we kind of go through the big picture, kind of big expectations, and then we dive in and start the process of a project. So the second part of that would be, have you considered, and then that's where you could actually have them maybe watch a detective video. Oftentimes we will have the audience, because we want to make a level playing field, right? So we don't know to what degree people are comfortable with murder mysteries and forensics and a lot of the language that you're using, which I love, again, too, because it's authentic. So one of the coaching strategies to enhance your project would be to enhance that launch experience and maybe provide. So for example, I had my students watch Curb Appeal on HGTV to see how someone actually makes a bid for landscaping. And after watching that and having time to process it and discuss it as a whole group, small groups, more fun, more about enjoying this kind of thing, I was able to then kind of assess where the audience was. And that helps with how much other information do I need to give them up front? Do I need to give them a handout on forensics? And because once they understand that vocabulary, and that's why I suggested looking at what are the duties and responsibilities of a detective. Let's actually role play this. If you guys are going to play the role of a detective, then maybe you should go to the Department of Labor website and look and unpack. What are the skills? What are qualities? And then that actually can take a fold in the project. So when they present at the end, that could be one of the pieces of evidence that you use for validating they actually did it, right? Is talk to me about the skills of a detective and the roles, responsibilities, and which of those played the biggest part in your research. So you've got a nice loop there. That would be a great place to look at other opportunities. That project launch is huge. Even a guest speaker, having a detective come in, or a recording. If you can't get someone physically, of course you can get a YouTube video, or you could record someone you know. Those little pieces, what they do, but if you really enhance the launch, you start to minimize a lot of follow-up questions about the project itself, right?
Right.
Because the more experience I get, like when my students watch the HGTV and understand what kind of questions does the landscaper ask a client, how do they present their materials? What are their behaviors? Do they use humor in their pitch? They start to almost build that kind of character, which is what we want them to do. Simulate the occupation. So if you're a detective, then I want you to do the same things a detective would, but you're actually doing it in this class and focused on researching and answering some guided, open-ended question that you provided them. So this is a perfect example of where teachers have really good stuff, and it's a matter of just maybe throwing ideas at you to consider. That's why I said, have you considered? And then you have the option of, give that teacher time to process. So it actually needs time to think about it. And maybe on my next coaching visit, we would revisit that, or in between communicate. Yeah, take your time, think about this. We don't want to make decisions right there and then in the process, because that can lead to some bad things.
All right. Well, I know you just told me not to decide if I'm going to take this or not. I need to reflect on it, which I will. But I will tell you that my initial thoughts are, I really like what you said, because I recognized, as you were talking, I recognized the problem that I have with this is that I say that I do this workplace stuff, but I really don't think I do based off what you said. I am like, oh, this is a writing class. We're going to focus on the writing. And I'm going to tell you, we're going to do a detective, but you don't actually have to know anything about being a detective. Just know detectives use this writing style. But I really think that it is important, and it would help them if I did do some of those initial steps that you said about letting them see a detective in action, whether it is, like you said, a guest or if it's a video that I find, and having them do some research initially on a detective. And then also, I think that'll help them make connections that they're not just taking my word like, oh, yeah, she said detectives use writing. They don't. Because that's what students think a lot. I'm never going to write again after I get out of these basic English classes I have to take. I don't understand what the purpose of them is. They're just busy work on my syllabus. And then they get into a career and they're like, wait, this is not a writing job. Why am I spending so much time writing? And so if that's what I want them to see, doing those things that you just said and then reflecting on them, that's always important. The reflection piece that you said will make it clear to them that, yes, I'm not just pretending that detectives use this. They actually do. So that was really
and then let me add this too, because you're teaching what we call an enduring practice, right? And this is the kind of an extension or an add-on that could be folded into the project is, I have a classroom of people who may be going in all completely different careers, pathways, right? And a lot of them can't make the connection of, well, what I don't write in this field, I'm not going to have to write like this, and I'm not going to be, and that in itself becomes Skills USA. One of the career technical student organizations in the country. Skills USA has types of skills that employers want. And one of them is technical skills grounded in academics, right? And so you've got a wonderful option here now of, yes, we are going to simulate the research writing process in more of a simulation with a detective. Now, reflect on your career pathway, where you're going. I'm going to be a doctor. I'm going to be a welder. And you go find out, that could be part of their research, is go find out what types of writing you'd have to do on the job. And we just did this week with students in a dental tech program. And rather than make up things that you would write, we actually go to the dental tech. We look at the Department of Labor. We will talk to dental techs. We will have the students contact a hospital or a dental facility, right? And actually validate it. What is the type of writing? And then you make the connection with the kids. You see how I made you research and do this writing of an essay and this process that you went through? You would do the same thing, whether you were writing an invoice, a work order, right? You're going to go through that same kind of, I may be researching parts at an auto tech store and going through inventory with parts, but I'm still using that skill of research. So that's where you have a powerful project, is that you can make that connection for them that, listen, we're going to simulate it this way in my class because this is engaging. It's going to provide you a real world kind of experience. Now go find out, what do you have to learn how to write and research in the job?
I really love that. And that's something I definitely don't do that I'll reflect, but that I would really love to add is that follow-up reflection on other careers. I really like that. And also, I just want to add something that I noticed you said, then go investigate other careers where you might do this type of writing, because that works for my project. But I just want to throw out that obviously you could say the same thing for any subject. Go research other careers that you use that math. Go research other careers that you use that science.
I just asked students that were in a plumbing program, right? And I said, what do you need to know about water? Oh, nothing. We install toilets and piping systems and this and that. I said, you don't need to know anything about water. So I had them go do a kind of an inquiry-based activity. And they came back and said, we should know about water because it has different things in it that can cause corrosions. And if I'm a plumber, I should probably be able to talk about that. So you're absolutely right. Whatever we do, whatever course you're teaching, and that's why I like this. It doesn't matter what grade or what content area the teacher is teaching. You can always go to industry. Who do I need to be able to communicate with if I get this job that I'm looking at? What kind of math or how do we use numbers in industry, right? So that's the connection. And then we make the students, no, you go do it. You said you wanted to be a podiatrist. You need to go experience it because like you said earlier, I love what you said. It validates it for them. It's not just your instructor telling you information and, you should be able to go out and validate things for yourself for the rest of your life on a personal or professional level.
Right.
Yeah.
And I will say, I kind of do the follow-up reflection. So I said I have an alternative for people that can't make it to class on the days we do this. And the alternative is interview somebody in a career you want to go into. But two things that I think you said that would make me reevaluate what I do is one, everybody should be doing that, not just the people that didn't do the detective, and not maybe a full paper, but to a certain extent. But also, I just say investigate a career that you're interested in. And they talk to them about general things they do. And I feel like might be useful for my class to have them focus on the things that you're saying. What writing skills, what research skills do you use in this career? As opposed to what's a day in the life in this career like? So that was really useful information and two things that I definitely would maybe consider doing. All right. Well, so far this has been great. You have any other questions for me to go through?
Yeah. So one of the things that I would ask, are there any tools that your students would be using?
So what do you mean by a tool?
Well, and that's just it. It could be, right? Some teachers would tell you a pencil is a tool, and I would agree with them.
Right. I would too.
Protractor, but so is software. So maybe I go to, for example, citation machine. Are you familiar?
Yes, I am.
Right. So one of the things that we are pushing and getting teachers to embrace is it's not just an English teacher's responsibility to teach that. Now, as a CTE teacher or a non-English teacher, right, as a math teacher, I still want my kids to know how to do that. But I'm not going to teach APA or MLA style or Chicago style, right? I don't have time. But I can teach them how to use a tool called Citation Machine, and they can create a works cited page. Now, granted, it would not be to the level you would submit for a PhD, but I don't need that level if I'm an auto tech dealer and I just need to validate that the source and where it came from, right? And so there's a great connection there. So one of the things I would ask you is to look at the tools that they're using, because we do know, right, that in our world of work today, that you need to know a lot of tech skills. It used to be when I was coming out, do you know how to do word processing?
Right.
Nowadays, the questions are, have you done any data mining recently? Do you know how to upload? Can you create a presentation? Can you do interactive Zoom sessions and things like that? So I would have you look at what are the tools that you're using along the way and see if there's opportunities to enhance that. That seems to be more leverage, and it provides 24/7, 365 kind of accessibility. And something you said earlier about the kids that couldn't make it to class. Have you considered videotaping the kids that do come to class and go through the experience and then just put it online for the kids who couldn't and they could watch? Now, I'm not saying that by watching you guys do it in class is going to make them, oh, that I got it. Yeah. But it would certainly minimize the number of questions, or it would also put some responsibility on those students to go watch the video of went in class, send me any clarifying questions you have.
Right. That's a great idea. I'm always a little, because I want them asking the questions, and I'm like, oh, if they just listen to other people asking the questions, they don't have to think of the questions themselves. But I'm sure there's a workaround with that where they still get the experience, but they have to like submit the questions they would have asked or something like that, that I could kind of
Absolutely.
best of both worlds there.
That's a great idea, right? Have them submit their questions before the class. And then you get theirs, and then you release those questions along with the kids that are there. Hey, your colleagues that couldn't be here today, they used this for you. And yeah, and you start to see you have a really good project. There's nothing wrong with your project. But what we're doing is, and that's what I'll close with this. One of the things that really I have to work at with teachers and educators all over is that when you say high quality PBL, project-based learning, the instructor feels like, oh, am I the teacher? I have to be high quality. That's about me. And no, it's not. When you look at the research and all the work done around high quality PBL, it's describing student experiences. So a high quality project would have many experiences for students to go through in their project. How many more and the types, that's up to the teacher. And when teachers start to realize that, we see them do a better job of enhancing projects rather than say, well, that's good enough, because now it's about, can I make the experience that these students go through better? Right? Can I make it more authentic? And there's always opportunities for that, because who knew we would be talking about watches today?
Right.
AI and its explosion. So that, and then for coaching, this might be just enough for you as the teacher, right? I can gauge whether that's enough time for you, or maybe you have more and you want to do more. That's something that we need to be cognizant of, because it's easy to Marty coaching with you, listening to you. We're coming up with all these other ideas. And if I don't provide the time and you don't take the time to process that and go, what's feasible? Now that I've got it, maybe you do this, a couple of these things for the next project and save a couple for the next iteration after that. Because I think we forget as teachers, we have to learn the process as well, right? If I enhance a project and I have new things that they're going to be taught or used or assessed on, I got to get myself up. And teachers don't get enough time for that. They're expected to be able to project manage that thing immediately the next day. And you're like, I'm growing and learning too. This is just like in industry. I'm managing a new project, but I've never done it this way. We need to give that space to our educators to let them grow and pilot this naturally. So that's where I would ask you, closing out on a coaching session, is, do you feel comfortable with enough right now? Because you have enough ideas that would definitely enhance your project. Or are you comfortable as a teacher going, Marty, I can do some of these. You got any more? But you have to make that decision.
I just want to throw out something that, using an industry thing, because I do work in marketing and in communication, and there's something called A/B marketing, where it's like, let's say an email that you send, and you send two different versions of it to see which one does better. And one of the things they'll tell you when you're learning how to do that is only kind of change one thing when you're sending out your test, because if the two emails are just completely different, and it's not just like the subject line's different or something like that, you're not going to know why one did better than the other. And so that's something that I'm hearing you saying. If I get all your tips here today and I'm like, oh, I'm going to go change everything all at once, and then I go do it in my classroom and it succeeds or it doesn't succeed. Let's say it doesn't. Let's say it doesn't go as well as usual. Is it because none of the tips you gave me were good or worked for that project? Or is it because only one did it, but I don't know which one. Now I need to start over. Or if it went really well, did everything go really well, or would it have been even better if I? So slowly working those things in not only makes it easy, I think, to take these changes, but it also helps you see what is and isn't working as it goes.
Well, how about this? This is where, as a coach, I got to walk, right? You say something and you just triggered, and I'm sitting here going, have you considered actually involving your students in this process by saying, I'm enhancing their project. I'm not going to tell you what I've enhanced or whatever, but as an instructor, I'm going to pilot some new characteristics to this project. I would like to survey you at the end of the project and ask you what was the most difficult part of the project and why. What did you enjoy most? And now you're simulating customer service surveys, right? And let's face it, that is the world we live in. I just got home last night. I have surveys from Marriott, Hertz, and American Airlines, right? And I need to give them good feedback so they can look at it. Same thing with you. You could actually have because they're part of a focus group. Think about it.
Right.
Just like an industry, right? Hey, you guys are going to help me pilot this new project that I'm doing. They don't need to know anything other than just that. But I want to get some honest feedback from you about components.
Bonus to what you just said, obviously I could do that on any project, but bonus specifically for this individual project is that it is primary research, and focus groups and surveys are all part of primary research. So that's also showing them how educators might use primary research. So it's still a demo. That's right.
And the mathematical part of this is you could introduce a Likert survey, Likert. And I share this with math teachers all over the country. What's a Likert survey? It is an odd-numbered survey, meaning that the middle choice is neutral. And then we use language like sometimes, most of the time, always, right? These subjective gradients that go in either. That is the basis for most customer service surveys. And now I've made it a math connection to kids about, okay, now how do we look at data and surveys and look at numbers, and how do we break this down and look at men's responses versus women's responses or age groups? And this is what happens with projects is we start collaborating, the two of us, and then we get multiple ways to really exploit that. So there you go. As a teacher, I would sit there and say, wow, you've got some math practices in your project. Did you know that? You need to document that, because if your leadership wants to see this, you have evidence now of how you've made this project. And there are varying degrees of integration, right? I can integrate and talk about Likert surveys and math connection, and it doesn't go any further than that for the project. The teacher determines to what degree of depth you go into. But for a lot of students, just making the connection between surveys and math, and they go, aha, oh yeah, I've done customer service surveys before. I give feedback. I respond to my favorite restaurants, make the connection to ratings and things like that. And you see, okay, so I guess we do need some math in our life. And it can just be that low level. It doesn't have to be, well, there's going to be math problems and I'm going to make you create a Likert survey and those are options for the teacher, but that's where the teacher chooses to what degree do I go into other disciplines.
That's really helpful to me. So sometimes when they do research a career, they interview a career or something, and I have asked them like, well, what type of writing and research do you do? It's especially hard for me with the math students. Science, I know they write reports. When they're like, well, we don't do any writing and research in math. And I know that's not true. I know that there is there, but because I don't know math, I'm not capable of saying, oh, well, here's some places. But you just showing me that right there, like, oh, there's a place that she used math, that you just research and writing in math. And so having those helps me help them when they are doing projects like that. So that was really great.
Well, and again, so it doesn't always look the same. You're right. So with math, have you considered, this is where I make connections. What do the numbers tell us? What do the numbers tell us about our job, our industry? So when they create infographics, which is a very popular piece of evidence that students would create using software like Canva, and they create an infographic, charts, tables, right? How do we communicate with numbers can be the connection. And it doesn't have to be an algorithm or a word problem and geometry. That's where we're expanding teachers' minds about the topic of math, is that you could simply have many teachers, especially in career tech or industry, you're reading charts, tables, data, numbers, the equipment has readouts, coding numbers and alphanumeric. You have all this that exists and people don't want to call it math. And I'm like, that's the most authentic math there is. How do we communicate with numbers? And then it could leverage you to, well, how did you get the pie chart? Where did that pie chart come from? You did a great job explaining and communicating what it's telling us, but where did it come from? And then there's the connection of a compass, and I draw a circle on a protractor, and that's where you can make again, you choose to what degree you go in depth with that. But any display of numbers is a great way, and it's easy for any teacher then to look at that in any occupation. How do we communicate with numbers as a auto tech or a researcher or a detective?
Right. Well, I loved everything you said. I do want to kind of give some overall tips that I took away for people that maybe already have this project in place, or maybe they already have it in their mind, but they've never tried it. Some things to consider building in that you can do no matter what the subject you're teaching is and what the project you're planning is. So this is what I got from you. Feel free to correct anything I'm about to say. So having them research the career that they're going to be simulating is a good starting place. Then you said you can go to the Department of Labor. That's always good information on that. And that's a good place for them to start researching. And once they've kind of done their own research in class or however you want to do it, having some type of, I don't know the word I'm trying to say, some type of touch point with somebody in that field, whether it's watching a video, whether it's having an actual person in that field come in and talk to the class, whether it's a field trip that you go on to that place, but having them have some type of touch with some real person in the field that can talk to them about how they use what you're doing. And then having them, as the project goes on, reflect on the career that they're investigating and how it uses the skills that they're learning in class so that they can make those connections themselves. But then also, once you're done with it, having them do some more reflection on a career that they're actually planning on going into and see how that career uses those same skills. So, and then maybe doing some focus groups and surveys at the end to see how it went for yourself and to make sure you can keep improving it going forward. So those are some big tips that I got that I think everybody out there can do and within, even if they're not doing an English project like me. So is that a good summary?
So if you don't mind, what I heard you say, because I can really, I would repeat it during a coaching session anyway.
Right.
Authentic occupations. Yes. Whatever project we do, somebody does that work and we can connect it. But I think it's going one step further and then having them compare and contrast that occupation with an occupation that maybe they're going into. So there's always that's where we start to teach kids about transferable skills, in that I'm playing the role of the detective and I'm learning what they do. And oh my gosh, these skills here translate over. And I was not going to be a detective. I was going to be a pediatric nurse. So they start to see that connection. That's the perk that
they see, oh, they're a detective too, because they're investigating, oh, what do these symptoms mean?
Exactly.
What's the disease that this person has? And how solve it?
The second tip you mentioned was phenomenal, is launching your project. I always tell teachers, the more effort you put into framing the project, and I call it a catalyst event, whether it's a video, a guest speaker, a tour. I once had students go out to a food truck in the parking lot of the school and ask questions to the food truck operator. They went in blind and then came back to my classroom, and I launched my project and said, we're going to play the role of food truck operators. You're going to create a menu. We're going to do a cost analysis. Boom, right? So that's a great one. And then I am with this. I would actually put this as number one, reflection. And that's throughout the entire project. And I'm guilty of this when I was first teaching, is not providing enough time for the participants to process and reflect. So at the end of a project, when students get feedback after they've presented, I used to make my students collect the feedback from the audience. So they actually collect that feedback. And then they had 2 to 3 days to go through it and then write a narrative back on me to tell me, listen, we got some great tips from everybody, but here's the 3 things that we're really square with. Here's a couple takeaways. Here's some other things, but they weren't feasible. Now I actually have evidence that the student reflected. So, but that is huge because I think it's human nature as a teacher. Go through the project, keep moving.
Right.
We should be providing more time for them to actually process, but not just freelance. You have to complete the surveys. You do have to reflect on what advice you got or suggestions, and you have to create some evidence. That's the key, is that they have to produce evidence that they actually did the reflection. There's the accountability part. So for my coaching assignment for you would be to process all those ideas. So we would confirm. That's why I repeat what you say, right?
Right.
Kind of a checklist of, I want you to consider all these. You don't have to implement them, but I want you to consider them. And then I need you to let me know, or we'll set up a Zoom session if I'm between face-to-face meetings. Because then the next step, we want to do that, have that conversation after you had some time to process, so that on my next visit, we're back to, okay, it seems like you've got a handle on this. Is there another project you'd want to do? So we're trying to build that process of, yes, okay, so I met with Marty, we collaborated, I reflected on what I got, here's what I'm going to do, here's my next steps. Then we go further.
So that bell means we're almost out of time. Do you have any homework for us?
So the homework is, if you haven't already, make a list of some of the ideas, strategies, techniques that I've provided you. Take some time, think them, process it. And then maybe choose at least one or two that you want to target. Now, if you want to go further, then that's fine. But at least one or two of them to choose. And when we meet again, or the next step would be to go ahead and implement those and pilot that, and then get your surveys back and find out if it made an improvement, if it was what you wanted it to be.
All right. Well, I loved everything you've talked about today. I think this was great, and I'm definitely going to try some of this next time I do this project. Thank you so much for being here today.
Have a good weekend.
Bye.
So Ashley, that was really informative. What were some things that you took away from that conversation?
Well, I love how he helped me feel confident in a project that I was already doing in my class. He didn't come in and say, oh, no, you can't do that. But I still feel like he gave me so many ideas on how to improve it. So he helped me without hurting my feelings. I think he did a great job with that.
That's a great takeaway. That was one of the things that, as a coach listening to this, I love how he said, in my coaching, language matters. I always like to validate when I listen. Did you feel validated in that conversation?
I definitely felt validated. I felt more confident in an idea that I already had while still learning ways to make it even better.
Yeah, I think that's a tip for coaches that we really want to validate as our teachers come in more and more from the field. They're not always coming from educator prep programs. They're coming from the field as a second career sometimes, that we want to validate the experiences that teachers have. And then he made the statement, I do a lot more listening than ever. And I thought that was a great tip as a coach.
Yes. So listen, I feel like everybody can be better at that.
Yeah, and I really felt like
anything.
I've heard this. Are you listening to learn or listening to respond? And I really felt throughout that conversation, he was listening to learn from what you're already doing. And so I thought that was great. The other one that I loved was, that I think applies not just to project-based learning, but to all projects, as Marty said, challenged you to enhance the launch experience for your kids. And he gave that example of, he has a student watch curb appeal on HGTV and then learn how a landscape designer makes a bid. And then we went into your project about the detective and that launch experience, how we could use the occupational handbook to help students really take ownership of the project. Did you hear that launch experience as you talked?
I did, and I thought it was such great advice and such a simple, but really I can see being in a very effective way. to get into the project in a way that's going to help students actually make those connections better. So it's just interesting how little small things that people could help you with can make such a big impact.
Yeah. And as a coach, I really want all coaches to really work with that launch experience that kids have. And it can be a project or just a daily lesson. Sometimes the start of a lesson lacks flair, and the students don't know why they're doing what they're doing, or they don't feel connected to it. And so that first thing that we do with students matters. And as coaches, I want to challenge us to really support teachers to enhance that launch experience for students in projects and just daily lessons.
All right. Well, those sound like great tips to me. So
Awesome. Well, I'm glad you had a great conversation with Marty. I look forward to hearing how this project goes in your classroom. Sounds like it's going to be really engaging.
all right. Well, thank you once more. And thank you for everybody out there listening. We will see you next time. Bye.
Ashley.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Class Act Coaching, brought to you by the Southern Regional Education Board. SREB is a nonprofit dedicated to improving education from pre-K all the way to PhD and into the workforce. Visit sreb.org for resources on instructional practices, teacher data, career pathways, and more. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow us on social media. You can find us on Facebook at SREB-School Improvement and on Twitter/X and Instagram, both at SREB Education. See you next week.